So as was mentioned, I'm Christina Cooper. I'm the Regulatory Affairs Manager and the PRS Administrator for Carilion Clinic. I'm going to be talking to you today about ClinicalTrials.gov. Let me get my slideshow to actually work. Just a second. It's running. It ran perfectly during the test, so of course it's going to be. Here we go. All right. So my learning objectives today are to recognize which research projects are defined as an applicable clinical trial, as well as how do we release and maintain a record on the website. So for those of you that are less familiar with ClinicalTrials.gov, it is a website and online database that is of clinical research studies and their results. So sponsors and investigators are responsible for recording their information on their studies within the website, and then that can be used for public access for not only patients and healthcare professionals if they have a disease or condition that they are interested in seeing if research is taking place, as well as other researchers. So researchers can look and see if results are being reported and match their research plans. They can look for specific topics, and they can identify unmet research and medical needs. How ClinicalTrials.gov is related to the FDA. So ClinicalTrials.gov website first launched in 2000 to comply with the Food and Drug Administration Modernization Act, or FDAMA, of 1997. This act required the NIH to create a database of clinical trials that applied to test investigational drugs for serious and life-threatening diseases under an investigational new drug, or IND, application. So this lasted for about 10 years until we had the FDA Amendments Act of 2007, or FDA. That's expanded the information that sponsors and investigators must submit to CT.gov that included different types of trials. So no longer was it just drugs, but it could also be biological products and devices. Additional information about the trials was to be included, and a results database for certain trials, which included descriptions of the participants and the study findings, including any safety information that was discovered along the way. And then another 10 years later, seems like every 10 years, so be prepared for 2027, FDA 801 became effective and coincided with our clinical trials registration and results information submission of the Public Health Service Act, or 42 CFR Part 11. This was effective starting on January 18th of 2017, and responsible parties had until April 18th of that year to start to comply. This provided additional information on what trials may be considered an applicable clinical trial that must be registered on ClinicalTrials.gov. This included controlled clinical investigations of any FDA-regulated drug or biological product for any disease or condition. So not only did it have to be serious or life-threatening, now it was for any kind of disease. And then certain studies of FDA-regulated medical devices, including pediatric post-market surveillances of a device product. Now, this did have a couple of exclusions. So if you were a phase 1 drug or biological product trial, you did not have to be registered. Also with small trials to determine device feasibility. So in the context of their determination of a small trial, they typically consist of 10 participants or less. So to help people discover which studies that they needed to do, what was exactly considered an applicable clinical trial, they came up with this checklist, which is on the screen. So it consists of 4 questions. All 4 questions have to be able to be answered yes in order for it to be considered an applicable clinical trial under that FDA 801. So just briefly go what they are. So the study needs to be interventional. So if you have an observational study, you could answer no to this question, but if you're doing anything with an intervention that's prospective with a human participant, then the answer to this would be yes. Question 2 is all about the US. So you have to be able to answer at least one of the following sub-questions for this answer to be yes. So it either has to have a study facility located in the United States or US territory. So even if it's a multi-site international trial, if you have one site that's within the United States, the answer to this would be yes. Is it conducted under an IND or an IDE? Then it's an automatic yes for this question as well. And then anything that is manufactured or exported from a US territory. So for this the manufactured definition is very broad. So even if all the components of your investigational product are being created within a different country, but your label for that product is being created in the United States, the answer to that actually is going to be yes. So you just need to be able to answer one of those, though, for the full question to be a yes answer. 3 is again going to be anything that's FDA regulated. So any drug or device or biological product that is under the FDA guidelines, then you'd be answering yes to that. And then finally, 4 is the trickster of the checklist because it's a negative. So it's anything other than a phase 1 of a drug or a biological product. So basically first in humans, and anything other than a device feasibility study. So again, if you're only looking to see the device and not necessarily if it can treat, cure, or mitigate a condition, then you can answer no to that. But if you have something that is going to try to treat, cure, or mitigate a condition, the answer would be yes. So if you don't have an FDA regulated product or you were able to answer no to any of those questions, you might think, great, I don't have to register on ClinicalTrials.gov. You don't meet those FDA regulations. However, there are some circumstances where you may have to include your record in the database. And one of those is NIH funding. So anything that's NIH funded, including phase 1, so slightly different from the FDA, if it's phase 1 trials or things that do not have FDA regulated products, including like behavioral interventions, but you have any wholly or in part NIH funding, you do need to register if it meets that criteria after that effective date of January 18th, 2017. So you may not have an applicable clinical trial according to FDA, you may not have NIH funding, and you think, great, I'm in the clear. Yes, for the regulations, so you are not under the mandated regulatory requirements under FDA or FDAMA. However, if you want to publish, you do have to register. Primarily, if you have anything that's under the ICMJE, which is a much broader definition. So their definition for anything that needs to be included is any research project that prospectively assigns people or a group of people to an intervention with or without concurrent comparison or control groups, to study cause and effect relationship between a health-related intervention and health outcome. Health-related interventions are those that we've talked about before, which includes drugs, surgical procedures, devices, behavioral treatments, but it also expands into educational programs, dietary interventions, quality improvement interventions, and process of care changes. And their definition of health outcomes are any biomedical or health-related measure obtained in patients or participants, including pharmacokinetic measures and adverse events. So much broader. So maybe wondering who is responsible for submitting onto ClinicalTrials.gov. If your study is under an IND or an IDE, real simple, it's going to be the IND or IDE holder, regardless of how the study is funded. So you can have additional funding, but if you have an IND, it's going to be your IND holder that's responsible for submitting on the database. If it's not under an IND or an IDE, it typically follows the funding. So if you have a grant, for example, your funding recipient is generally going to be considered the sponsor because they're going to be the ones that initiated the funding proposal and designed the study. If you're under a sponsored contract, so if we have an industry sponsored clinical trial, for example, the funder of the study is going to be the responsible party. And then if you have no funding, then it's going to be the person or entity who initiated the clinical trial. So again, those are going to be primarily for things like our investigator-initiated studies that you may want to get published. So you may be asking, as a PI, can you be the responsible party? Yes. So a PI is able to be responsible for conducting, if they are responsible for conducting the trial, they have access to and control over the data, they have the right to publish themselves, and they can meet all the requirements under the regulations for submitting and updating of the clinical trial information. The sponsor has to designate the PI as the responsible party, and the PI has to submit via the sponsor's protocol registration and results system, or the PRS organizational account. So they don't permit accounts for individuals. It's always going to be the organizational one. So again, for ours, it would be under Curling Clinic. how do we get started with the clinical trial? So the best way to start or to get kind of your information that you're going to need in order to determine whether you need to do it begins with things like the PRISM application. So PRISM has a section that is for clinical trial registration. It includes if the study is FDA regulated. They also do have help bubbles on that right side of the screen that you can click on and get the definitions for better clarity. They'll ask if you have any NIH funding, and then they'll ask if it's defined by either the FDA or the NIH, and they'll again give you some guidance on those definitions that we talked about earlier. For this, I answered no, so I got to keep on going. And the question was whether I was going to submit or not. So again, this is going to be if you have something that is not FDA regulated, it's not funded by the NIH, but you do plan on publishing your results. So you can say yes to this question that you are planning on submitting, even though you don't have those regulatory requirements. If you answer yes to this, it'll pop up additional information. They'll ask you about like the NCT number, which we'll go over in a second, and when you're going to enroll and who's the responsible party. So it does give you additional information again about who's the responsible party. You list who is going to be doing it. If you have an industry sponsored trial, you're going to be answering these questions just as you would if you didn't have one, but you would be putting like your responsible party as that funder again. So for example, if you have a drug study with Pfizer, Pfizer is going to be listed as the responsible party. Where can you find more information on who exactly is responsible? So if you do have one of those industry-sponsored clinical trials, it's going to be in the contract. So it will list this. I pulled this off of two of our examples. The first one is a study that's not under FDA regs, but it is under the Public Service Act. So they did agree, and they asked that we do not submit. So if you have a multi-site, you are not, again, the responsible party for making sure that it's on ClinicalTrials.gov, and they do ask that it is just one record per clinical trial. So if it's a multi-site, I don't know why I'm picking on Pfizer, but I'll pick on Pfizer. So Pfizer is going to be the responsible party. They're going to put in their contacts and locations every location where this is taking place, and that would be where we would be located. But it is their responsibility to make sure that we are included. And then the second option was under FDA. So they did also agree under that section 801 of FDA that they would be the responsible party. You can also find on ClinicalTrials.gov website. So for those questions on that PRISM application, if you do say yes and it asks for that NCT number, that's the number that's on the public access website. So you can find it at the very beginning. Usually you can just go in the search form. You can look by sponsor, you can look by device. If you have an IND number, you can put that in there and it'll usually show up. So that's where you can find that location and that information. It'll also tell you who the sponsor is and the responsible party. Again, most of the time, that's going to be the same person or entity, but not always. And then they will also provide the last updated post. So if some entities will place us in there and just have us as not yet recruiting before we're site activated, and then some sponsors or responsible parties will wait until we have site activation before they'll include us as a potential site. You can also look, if all else fails, you can ask regulatory bodies, such as the IRB of record, if you grantee, sponsor, contracts, the IND or IDE holder, the funding organization, and finally the institution. And I'm a good Googler, so if you have trouble, you can always reach out to me. How you will know if you need to, if you are going to be the responsible party, the IRB will let you know. So this is an example of what comes on the Correllian Clinic IRB outcome. So the IRB will also make that determination. If you think it doesn't meet those criteria, but they believe that it does, they can tell you that you do need to register it under that section 801 of FDA, and they will provide you information on how to do it. The contact information on there is our general research and development email, but you can also reach out to me directly. and we can get you in the system if you're not already. You can also go to the ClinicalTrials.gov website. They have good resources on how to navigate the system and find information. Your publisher, if you have an idea of where you want to publish your results, you can look to them and they can provide you guidance on when they're going to require it. So again, publishers require, if they're under the ICMJE definition, they're going to ask that you submit your record into the ClinicalTrials.gov website before your first enrollment. If you're going to have an applicable clinical trial, so it falls under that FDA or the NIH recommendations or requirements, you have until 21 days after your first enrollment. So it's always best to start at the very beginning in case there's any kind of issues, but just so you're aware of that. And then finally, your funding agency can provide you with additional guidance. So how do we register? So ClinicalTrials.gov is the public access site. Register.clinicaltrials.gov is the PRS system. So that's going to be the protocol registration and results system. Our organization, if you're under Carilion Clinic, is going to be Carilion Clinic with no space. They want one-word organizations. So that's what they've created for us. And then your username, again, if you have an account already, it's typically going to be your Carilion email beginning. So this is the beginning one of mine because it's my name. And when you get registered, they'll provide you a password and they'll ask you to change it. If you have any issues getting in or getting access, you can reach out to me. I can reset your password and make sure that your account is good and up and running. Now, the website itself has modernized. They were in beta testing for quite a few years, but they have now had a modernized version of ClinicalTrials.gov or the PRS system. As with all new changes, there have been some kinks that have taken place along the way. So they do have the option that you can go back on the classic. So if you have a record in there already and you're pretty familiar with working within the previous classic version, you can go in and do that. You can also go into the modernized. So if it's a brand new study, you can go ahead and do it in the modernized version. If you have a study that you're wanting to do some amendments, they were recommending that you go back into classic. I do believe as of a couple of weeks ago, they are now saying you can do that in modernized and it should work. The good news is, either way, it'll save in both versions. So you can use classic or modernize and the results and that information will be the same. Quick start guide. This is in the PRS and this is available to you then, so I won't go through all of this for you, but just so you know how you do it, the very first thing you're going to do is change your password from the one that they provided for you. It will guide you on how to create a record in the system. There's very helpful training tools in there of what they're asking for, definitions that they want. You would go through it. It does take a long time to do these. So I think the next slide has all the different sections, but just so you know, they average about a day. The good news is you don't have to do it in one go. So you can save it. It will save your information. You can pick up where you left off. You can add different stuff before it gets submitted for PRS review. So you can have sort of a template going as you're doing like your PRISM application and things like that, just so that you're ready to go before you have that enrollment timeline. So again, this is the record information that is requested within the website itself. Study identification, title, basically your short title, if you have any acronyms, any of that information. Study status, this is where it gets really important. And when we talk about, when Hillary talks about FDA audits, this is kind of where they can catch you on stuff. So it's going to be up to you to provide dates if you are the responsible party of when your study is going to start, when your enrollment's going to end, and when you're going to be able to provide results. They will ask you that information. You can change it and adjust it, but if you have it in there listed as you're going to be done on a certain date, and then you haven't changed it and you've gone past that, it's going to trigger that it is a problem record, and they'll reach out to you to fix that. They'll ask for your sponsors and collaborators. So we do a lot of studies with BTC. So we have them listed as collaborators quite often. They'll ask you a general oversight of your study and a study description. It doesn't have to get into bare bones. It's kind of a lay summary. Again, this is a public website. So you don't have to get too technical, and they actually prefer that you don't. That can be used. A lot of times you can copy and paste things from like your consent form. So that already has to be in lay language. So it's a good tool to use if you need help. They'll ask for conditions that your study is studying. So that's good for keywords. There are currently over 20,000 records in the system itself. So to be able to find yours, you want to have good keywords for people to be able to search for your study. They'll ask for your study design and arms and interventions, anything that you have. Even if you don't, if it's only a single arm, you will have to include all that information. They ask outcome measures. You do have to have at least one primary outcome, and you do have to be fairly specific on what your tool is going to be that they use. So that's normally what I see get sent back for revision is if you say you're going to use a questionnaire, or say you're going to use a visual analog scale, you have to list that 1 is 0 pain, 10 is the worst pain possible. You can't just guess or just say visual analog scale. So they do ask you to be a little bit specific on how you're going to measure that. Your eligibility checklist, so anybody that you are going to make eligible or ineligible, you include that information in there. It doesn't have to get super specific, but just kind of, again, this is a research database, so people can look and see, so you can have some pretty broad inclusion exclusion criteria in that section, just to help to see whether people can be recruited into your trial. Your contacts and locations, again, that's going to be where we're going to be found. If we're doing an industry sponsored clinical trial, that's where your location would be listed. You can have yourself as a PI listed as the contact, or if you have a clinical research coordinator or somebody else that's helping you assist you with the study, they can be listed and you can provide their information. IPD, sorry, I should have spelled that out. That's intellectual property disclosure. They do ask you a sharing statement. There is no right or wrong answer. It's just that, are you going to share your intellectual property? You say yes or no. It does provide a free box that you can provide additional information if needed. And then finally, references. So if you've utilized any other studies in the past, any publications to help support your trial, you would list those there. When you, excuse me, when you need to update your record, you need to do it anytime there's a change within 30 days. So if you have a protocol amendment, your change in contact information, so say you had a coordinator and the coordinator has left, you need to put the new information so people can reach out to you. And then those changes in recruitment or enrollment, again, that's going to be pretty specific, that's kind of what is utilized as far as reporting results goes. Even if there's no changes similar to an IRB review, it is an annual requirement that you go in and reconfirm as a responsible party the accuracy of your record and resubmit for a PRS review. And then your record can be edited at any time. There is a modify button and it re-releases the record for PRS review. That is the system database. They will review it. They don't review for scientific merit. But they will review for things like spelling. So they just look to make sure that it looks good on the public website, that people are able to get the proper information. If you have anything in like first person, they usually will send that back. So as the PRS administrator, I will review your submissions prior to us sending it for a review. And lucky for you, I have no scientific background, but I do have an English degree, so I can help you with any of your spelling errors. You want to make sure that everything is good to go before it gets published. So results reporting. This is where the big to-do is. So because again, it doesn't have scientific merit reviews, so you can put anything in there, but they do want to make sure that anything that's being put in there is truthful and honest, and it is disclosed to the public. So you do have to report your results if it's an applicable clinical trial. They will ask for you to submit that no later than 12 months after your study completion date, and that date is the last day of your final subjects completed their participation, or the final day that you completed or you retrieved study data. Now you can do extensions. Again, you have the opportunity to do it. You need to do it. Here's a couple examples where you can get at least 2 additional years. One being if it's a product that's still unapproved, unlicensed, or uncleared, that still is under development by the manufacturer. So you may be having to go back in and re-enroll participants to get more data. And then the other is if you are found something when you were doing your study that's leading you in a different direction within 1 year of that primary completion date. If you're going to use it for a new use of the approved, licensed, or cleared product that's being studied in the trial, you can also ask for an extension. The important thing to remember here is that you have to ask for that extension prior to your completion date that you've provided. So if you've said you've completed your study January 1st, 2025, they're going to be looking for your results by January 1st, 2026. If you submit on January 5th, oh, wait, we have to delay for a little bit, it's going to be considered, it's going to be flagged as late results, and it could lead to potential penalties. So you just want to be able to do that November, December. You just want to be able to make sure that you've met that date that you have declared. What they look for in the scientific results reporting. So that's where the scientific results come in and the scientific merit. So they're going to look at your participant flow. So they're going to look at who you enrolled, how many you enrolled, how many completed your trial, all that information, baseline characteristics of your trial, how it went, your outcome measures. Did you meet your primary objectives, and any statistical analyses that you've had completed? Any adverse events, real important that those are included in there. So we know adverse events happen, so they get a little bit suspicious. If everything ran perfectly and your study was just amazing from the get-go. And then your administrative information. So they want to make sure this is also for your publications, so that you did have IRB approval. They'll ask for that kind of information, and anything that's related to that, the more administrative side of your clinical trials. Why do we submit the results? Well, not only is it a requirement, it is primarily, it's the right thing to do. So again, this is a public access website. It's supposed to be able to help people be able to recruit, to learn about conditions that are being studied, to see where we're missing conditions, where we could potentially have beneficial information included for research for the overall good. But there also is always this threat of penalties. So I have heard about this since 2009 when I started my research compliance career. So since 2007, there has been a requirement that you have this results reporting, that you include it in your ClinicalTrials.gov record, that it is compliant. There's the threat that you have monetary penalties of up to $10,000 a day for every day that you're out of compliance. That does increase with inflation. So I think last time I checked, it was 13,000, but I think it may be up to 14,000 a day now. Now I'm telling you that nothing has been claimed by the US now. So this is a website I took a screenshot of earlier this month. There's a FDA trials tracker website that is up, and they are running compliance. So out of the trials at that point, there was 25,741 that said they should have had results reported by that time frame, and only 20,095. So a little over 78% are in compliance. The other almost 22% are out of compliance. Out of that 22%, $88 billion could have been claimed. Don't tell Elon, but it has not so far. This is still at zero. So again, it's the right thing to do. That's the main goal. We can threaten you, but it also, things are happening, so it could happen at any time. You just want to make sure that we are following as much as possible. So I think that's the last of my slides. It is. So did anybody have any questions before we move to Hillary?
Nothing in the chat, Christina.
Okay, and you can always reach out to me. And sorry, I should have had my email address, but you can reach out to me if you have questions afterwards. I know it was a lot of information.
Christine,
It's good.
this is just a comment. There sometimes we get requests because people want to do like nice to have it in there, and that's probably not best practice, right? It really should just be things that do need to be registered, right?
Yes, and yes. So again, a lot of people want to have their records in there, or again, for publication purposes. It doesn't have those same restrictions as far as the regulatory requirements go. However, it can trigger issues. So if we have a lot of studies that are looking as if they're out of compliance, we haven't had results, you really have to commit that you're going to keep that that record up to date. If you leave the institution, for example, you need to make sure that that's clear if you're going to take it with you or it's going to be transferred to a different person, because once they're in there, they're in there. We can't take them out. We can't remove them. I have had to have requests for PIs that have unfortunately have passed. So we have, they can't approve their studies anymore. So it is a lengthy trial, it takes a lot of time to make sure that we are compliant. And again, if we have a lot of records that are in there that are kind of half done, it's not benefiting anybody. It's not going to get anybody to enroll in your trials. But it also can lead the FDA, which is a good segue, for the FDA to take a closer look at all of the trials that are taking place at our location. So again, if you want to do it, I can encourage it, and it won't have those penalties and those restrictions. But again, it can then lead to additional scrutiny for our institution. So we just want to make sure if you're going to do it, you need to really, truly commit.
Yeah, thank you.
And that is a great transition. See, Christina, we talked about this. It's a great transition to getting prepared for an FDA audit. That visibility and all of the record keeping that Christina just talked about gives more visibility to the requirements and regulations of the FDA. What I'm going to talk to you about, I have set up as more general information, and I did this purposefully because what I'm providing you today is more along the lines of a framework or a springboard, if you will, for conversations to start within your research team the day that you say, we're going to do an FDA study, because that's exactly the time that you need to start planning for what happens with an FDA audit and all the requirements for that. If you'll click one more time. You've already seen the learning objectives that were advertised with this session, but one thing I really like to focus on, that's the educator part of me as well, is there's really core skills that are developed through the preparation of an FDA study and audit, to where it's really about communicating with your whole team. Because one thing I hope I get across today is when you do an FDA study, communication is everything, and it cannot just be the reliance of one or two people to understand what to do with all the components that go into this. And so to begin, just to set our mindset and get ready to take in this new information and form a checklist or your active plans, is one thing that everyone needs to realize is part of being prepared or feeling prepared is actively doing something. And so an analogy I'm going to use that is simple, that I hope to carry through the whole presentation to make it more understandable, since it's lunchtime. An analogy I'm going to start with, and I feel like most of us that are watching this or attending today are planners or organizers. Part of our preparation, even for being invited to a restaurant, and let's say a fancy restaurant, to where we're going to eat with a group of people that we want to make a really good impression on, we care, what they think of us and what happens. And so the analogy I'm going to use is being asked to attend a restaurant. You're going to eat there. You've never been there before, but what are you going to do? 3 things I would do myself personally. The very first thing I would do is I would look up the menu. Okay, I've never been there. Look, JT's shaking his head. And he's the only one I can see besides Christina, so I'm relying on your facial expressions. I'm going to look up the menu and I'm going to see what it's all about. I'm going to see what they offer. I'm going to personally see what I like. Number two, I'm going to go more into it and I'm going to do a little word of mouth. I'm going to be like, hey, Christina, have you ever eaten there? What's good? What's not good? JT, what was your experience? What did you see somebody order and you were like, I would not order that? And so I'm going to investigate a little bit more from people who have actually experienced it, what they've said. The third thing I'm going to do is when it gets to that day and I go to the restaurant, I'm going to enjoy the experience, good or bad. I know I'm prepared because I actively did this stuff and I know what I'm going to order. I know what I can adjust to because of recommendations. And so I'm going to use this analogy through the presentation. Next slide. Okay, so here we go. When we have background information, it's like looking at the menu first. Okay. And so we need to know the background and what the initiatives are for the FDA right now. And so next slide. One initiative that everyone should hopefully be aware of at this point. This was officially approved, adapted on January 6th of this year. And so it's the ICH E6 Revision 3, and it personally deals with good clinical practice. The yellow is what I consider my post-it note, to where the big idea of this revision was basically to do more risk monitoring, to where it starts with the study design, and it's to ensure that participant protection and data quality is there from the beginning of it. And so that is a huge component of this. It's okay. The post-it note was there. The next document that is really important, again, on the FDA's menu, if you will, is their new guidance in regards to electronic systems. Everyone is going with more electronic information instead of paper. Some people still do paper, I'm sure, and some research team will still do some paper documentations, but a lot of it is electronic systems. I put a link in the bottom. It is a hyperlink, and this is just really good awareness and a guidance document to print off and have for reference over what the FDA is really focusing on. If you'll go to the next slide. So the spotlight I really wanted to focus on for this specifically is in this FDA guidance document. There are two specific sections that deal directly with audits and what they will be looking for based on electronic systems, if that's what the study is using. So you have to have an audit trail, and basically, to simplify this, instead of the paragraph on the screen, they want to make sure that you are keeping a trail to where when things are changing or something needs to be documented, it's not overriding itself, to where everyone knows how to use the system and you can still track changes, to where it's literally a trail of everything that's happened to show that it is being monitored. The second bullet where it says inspection readiness, that means that somebody needs to know how to use the system. And by somebody, I mean several people on the team, depending on the size of your team. But I'm going to focus on that last sentence where it says, during inspections, FDA reviewed staff training records, the system access procedures, and audit trails. And so that's just all information that they want to see. The staff was trained, how people can access the system you're using, and how you've done the audit trail to show, changes, improvements, what's happened. And so now we're at number 2, to where it's that word of mouth. What can we gather from other people who have had this experience? So what can we've already found from people who have had an FDA audit before, or what's been reported? Next slide. And so in 2010, it's hard to think how long ago that was, but in 2010, I thought this is a really relevant quote, because more than half of the warning letters that went out dealt with failure to maintain adequate and accurate case histories that record observations, data pertinent to the investigations, and then the individual that administered investigational drugs are employed as control. Okay, so this was in 2010. I want you to remember that date. I also want you to note that it's okay. I also want you to know that FDA warning letters are published on their website. I put a link on that to where if you get an FDA warning letter, you can go on and visibly read it. It is shown for everyone else. Again, it's that learning from what others do. So FDA warning letters are published on their website. So I did some research and I also looked at even common documentations our office sees a lot, to where a lot of the documentation issues are incomplete eligibility criteria. You have missing or complete adverse event reporting. And so this is the most recent, to where I did big picture search of what are we seeing at the IRB and what are commonalities that other institutions are talking about as well. So next slide. So the FDA actually is very transparent and tries to show everybody from their monitoring, they show a measurement of what their most common findings are. So this is from the fiscal year of 2023. 2024 has not been published yet as of the last time I checked, which was in February, when I originally put this together. But there's also a link here to where you can look at what the most common clinical investigator inspectional observations are. And as you look at these bullet points, have they changed a lot since 2010? A lot of them have not changed a lot since 2010. And Christina's sadly shaking her head like, no, it has not changed. And so it's very focused in on a lot of what they're looking for, because unfortunately it's commonalities. One thing I do want to mention is Form FDA 1572. That is an investigator statement that a principal investigator has to sign, and it's called a commitment to compliance. And so the principal investigator signs this FDA 1572 document to even do an FDA study. And I just think it's really important to know that it's coined as being the commitment to compliance. Next slide. And so just an example, as part of helpful documentation organization that our office provides, we have a checklist. I'm sure that some other teams and research and development have helpful documents like this, to where it just helps hone in on how to organize documentation. It's a lot. It needs to be there, and you need to know how to show trails of it. And so it's a checklist that is provided by our office that teams can use to even start from day one of all the materials that needs to be stored for this study regulatory binder. Next slide. Okay. So the FDA inspection, this is when we arrive at the restaurant and it's the actual experience. One thing to emphasize about FDA audits and inspections is they can be unannounced and unexpected. That is why it is so important that more than one person on the team, or actually even two people, like this needs to be a whole team function to prepare for an FDA audit or what to do. Unannounced audits, that they do not take it where it's like, oh, our PI is out of the country, you're gonna have to come back. It doesn't work like that. That they will still come, they still ask for information, and you have to know what to provide and all of your documentation be there and what to do. And so they're there. Next slide. So part of pre-inspection preparation, I've already talked about team organization. So these are just the essential steps of the audit. And this is a broad overview. These are some of the tips and suggestions we have. And so you can actually keep clicking, Christina, to where, yes. And so the identify who was on the form for 482, the recipient. So as soon as you start looking at that, then on the right side, you'll see the inspection request tracking log. From the time the auditor shows up, a tracking log needs to be started, to where you are documenting everything they ask you for. You're documenting what was requested when they came in, and you're basically keeping a flow chart of it. You'll meet as a team to prepare for it and even have a checklist of what's to be done. as you can see, this is not something that could be done on the fly. And so since you've already prepared and all of your documentation in place, this should just be steps to where you're ready to execute it. You can keep hitting. And then one more. So the review protocol and procedures, this should be done throughout the study. That is one thing I wanted to emphasize, to where this is pre-inspection, and this is pre-inspection because it can be done anytime and throughout the study. Preparing summaries of even complex protocols, that's helpful for your whole team. There should never be a time that any auditors comes in or anyone comes in and ask about a protocol, and then you explain it and them say, what happens, to where if it's complex, provide a summary. Flow charts of key processes, and compile reports for your adverse events and even CAPAs. Those are all really important. Next slide. And so this is just a helpful overview of all the required notifications that have to happen. I put this on there because if these people, all of these people are already involved in your study from the beginning, and so having that constant communication and relationship with them is really important, especially for FDA studies, because they have more regulatory requirements. Next slide. And so pre-inspection planning, as you see the little helpful tool on the left side of your screen with the blue and purple boxes, 50% of this is already done if you're already reviewing and organizing throughout your study, to where this is a constant, it is part of the flow of your study team, to where that is done. If an auditor is actually there, the designation and the preparation of just the room and literally the staging area, training what staff is going to do what, that is the portion you will have to deal with in a short time frame. And so that's just something to think about and consider. The pre-inspection preparation, the document preparation, these should already be in your binder, to where it's just making them accessible. This is the most commonly requested documents that, through research and other sources of information the FDA provides, that are requested most frequently. A document readiness checklist is something that we put together as just helpful tips, to where, remember that all documents have to be accessible, and that means if it's paper documentation or electronic systems need to be functional, your archive records need to be available, and then make sure that the version control is verified, to where if a different person has to step in, then they can do that. So that's just, things you don't think about, that's helpful to think about in your planning process. So I put a conductor on this slide because even during the inspection, remember that your study team and the person assisting the auditor with this, you are the conductor. You are the one that provides the notes, the information, and answers their question. Make sure that you are only answering the questions that are asked of you. There are FDA audit questions that are accessible all over. Like Christina said, we're good Googlers. All of us are, to where I did not provide any questions because there are just so many, and you can even determine which one are best for your team and your study, and create templates, create answers to where everyone knows. It's also important to maintain that communication logs with timestamps, and you're tracking every single thing that the auditor is asking of you. It is a strategic move for an auditor to have moments of silence, to where you've answered their question and then it's just silence. Do not feel the need to fill in the silence. You do not have to keep going, to let it be that awkward pause, to where you've answered the question, it's done, and then you'll wait until they move on. So be confident in yourself and your team. Be the conductor. Documentation management, best practices are listed in there, but I really want to focus in on the error management. I think this is really important to recognize because errors are going to occur, incidents are going to occur. It happens. It's research. It is unpredictable. So part of error management is really just showing an explanation of known issues, and that's after it first occurred. you're documenting the root of it. You're creating a timeline of a corrective actions taken. Even our office personally, we like to see what timelines were done and the corrective actions that have taken place, and then compiling an evidence of improvement. You know, that is good information to know you've recognized errors and you've taken care of them and you've documented it. Next slide. So post-inspection actions, these are things that need to happen together. That's why I put it on this colorful chart. One thing I do want to specify is Form 483. That is an outline of the observation. And so that is basically an opportunity for you to make corrections, to plan future actions you are going to take, to where they have just outlined observations for you and may, you know, provide certain things that need to be corrected. However, a warning letter is more serious. It is the formal communication of serious action that will be taken if things are not corrected. And so that's why I put it in red, to where they're two very different forms. You want to have a 483 to where it outlines your observations, but a warning letter is more severe and immediate action has to be taken, and it has to be reported to the IRB, and the FDA will monitor you closely to see if you fix that. So the keys to the success of an FDA audit is being prepared daily. It is from the first time you commit to an FDA study and having confidence in your team that everything is being done as it is supposed to be done, and even above and beyond. It's maintaining cooperation with all of the stakeholders that are involved in your study, addressing issues promptly, and again, showing that an issue happened, you addressed it when you're supposed to, and even documenting how you fixed it with a timeline, with extras above expectations, and keeping your documentation organized and exactly what you need. And so to summarize preparation, I like the literal definition, because when you look at it, you look at all of the different phrases or ways that they describe prepare, and it's all stuff we've already talked about today, to where click the screen, Christina, click it. Oh, it's all accomplished to where we've made it ready beforehand, to where we've prepared our team. We have the proper mindset of the confidence of anyone on our team knowing what to do, and that you have a plan in place that literally anyone can access in case of an FDA audit. You've already worked out the details and you know how to work out details immediately. You've put everything together and the team knows how to access it, and it is in a written form of what to do and how to execute. And so you are prepared. That is all for me.
Thanks so much, Hillary. Any questions for either Hillary or Christina? You guys did a fantastic job. Really great overview. Dr. Farrell?
Yeah, just a comment. Again, great presentation. Just to give everybody a reality check, the IRB was audited within the last 5 years, and they came out with
Years ago.
a great record. And I don't know if you want to comment about that, Hillary, and how that process was, even though you weren't there.
I've heard about it often, and we do have a plan in place. We had a plan in place prior, and one thing I can say that I've heard Meredith and the team talk about often is it was unannounced. The people that were there, that we did have some out of town folks that were out of the country, and so that was a real life experience we had to talk about. But because of an action plan that was put in place to where they could pull the documentation, the two staff members that handled it knew exactly what to do. And you really don't know what an auditor is going to focus on until they get there. And so they really just focused in on one aspect that they wanted to look at, and it had to deal with IRB members, to where documentation and the trail that's supposed to be for IRB members. But I mean, the IRB is open to anything like everybody else, to where they could have looked through all of our studies at Carillion. They could have looked at one specific one where we had oversight of it. And so again, it's just always being prepared. I'll use the coined word today. The buzzword today is prepared.
Yeah, not only was it unannounced, it was right in the middle of the summer, as I remember. And
Yes,
they
during
stayed for several
vacation time.
days. It's not like an afternoon of review. It was over several days.
It was, and it was unannounced within like a 24-hour time period to where they had 24 hours before it started. And so the seriousness of it is all in the planning and making sure your team's ready and everyone knows how to execute it.
So I think then your buzzword is appropriate, right? Prepare, plan, and document what you can so that when those surprise events happen, you're ready. And
Yes,
there's,
exactly.
you can't help the people that are out of the country, but you can
No.
plan ahead for
Yeah,
having the
exactly.
documentation in their absence. So,
Exactly.
well, thank you both so much. Both presentations were extremely helpful. If you don't mind putting your email in the chat in case people have follow-up questions. And then, of course, folks can reach out to us in the OCPD office, and we can direct you to Christina or Hillary if you don't have a chance to grab their email before we wrap up. So any final questions before we end things for today? All right, well, everyone have in slides. Yes, we will post the slides on our OCPD website. So those should be there in the next 7 to 10 days, along with the recording of the session. So, all right, well, everyone have a wonderful day, and we will see you guys soon. Bye all.